Hey, how's it going? Keith Morgan here for TechTarot.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to do 2D tracking in After Effects. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to use tracking to integrate text onto moving footage, but we'll quickly just take a look at what we're going to be making today. Okay. So, as you can see, we are also going to be taking a look at how to use some rotoscoping to integrate our text into our scene. And yeah. So, with that, let us get right into it. So, I've started a composition with our footage in place already. And what we'll need to do to track is have our tracking panel. Now, if you don't have your tracking panel over here on the right, as I do, you can find it under Window and then Tracker, and then it'll show up over here. And what you want to do is click on your footage, and then go ahead and hit Track Motion. And this will isolate your footage. Now, if you notice here, we have a single track point, but for our devices, we're going to need two. So that we can track the rotation and the scale of our footage, just in case it changes as the footage moves. So we're given two track points, and we're going to want to put them on features that are high contrast and easily trackable. Now we only need to track what what the text is going to be following. So we'll say right where his foot comes up there, we'll start tracking there. So with one of our trackers, we'll go and we'll select this white object here. And with our second tracker, we can go ahead and select this white object up here. And now if you don't know what these boxes are, the first box on the tracker, the smaller one, is the pixels it'll search for when it's tracking. And the second box is the region around with which it will search for those pixels. So if your camera is really, really fast, you'll want to expand that box as those pixels will move further away from their point in time between frames, and it can easily get lost. So if it travels outside of this box, between frames, you'll lose your tracking point and it'll just not work out too well. So you want to make sure you have enough, but if you have the box too great, it'll also slow down how long it takes to track. So we have our 2 points there, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to click this button down here, which analyzes forward. Alright, and as you can see, if we just scrub through this, those stick to their respective points quite well. Okay, and now we're going to have to add a target for this data, and we'll use a null object for that, so we can use it to parent objects to. So we'll go over here in our layers, and we'll choose new, and null object, and we'll just call this track brick, and I'll drop it below our brick pre-comp. And then over here in the tracker, we'll edit our target to the the null for the bricks. We'll hit OK, and then we can hit apply, and that will, if we hit OK on the X and Y, then that'll put keyframes for the places that it needs it. And then we can just trim our null object to our keyframes just by dragging in those handles. And if we scrub through here, we can see it sticks to that place very, very well. So now what we can do is we can go to our text tool, and we can type in whatever we're going to be using. Okay, and we will make it white for this tutorial. And we'll go ahead and we'll hit S to bring up our scale options, and we'll just scale it down. And we'll move it into place. And now, so this is a little bit of a more advanced technique, but we'll turn on the 3D for the layer. And then what that allows us to do is if we rotate it on the x-axis, we can get that perspective that we want. So that's always good. So we'll just, with that lined up, we'll just put that into place. And we'll also trim our text layer to the same length as our null. And I'll just put it above the null object. And then what we can do is we can take our pick whip and parent it to our null object. So now if we just scroll through here, you see our text stays pretty well on those bricks. I'm just going to change its rotation a little bit so it matches the perspective a bit. And then to integrate the text onto the bricks a little bit better, we're going to go ahead and add a fast blur. And we'll blur it out by about 3 pixels. Just to match the slightly blurry quality of the footage. And then if we hit this toggle switches modes button, or you can do the same by hitting F4, you get access to your blending modes. And we're going to go ahead and switch the blend mode to overlay, just so the white isn't so stark, and so it lets some of the darker elements through. And then we'll hit T to bring up our opacity, and we'll drop the opacity of the layer a bit. And then if we scrub through this, you can see, it's starting to look pretty good. Until, we come back to where his foot's over it, and it's covering the text. So we don't want that. So this is where the masking options come into play. So with our text layer selected, we'll go ahead and choose the pen tool. And we're just going to draw a really rough curved shape around his foot. You don't need to make this silly and stupid specific, as it's, for a few frames it's blurred out, and we can mask most of that with feathering. So moving on, we'll hit M to bring up our mask path option, and we'll hit the stopwatch to start keyframing, and we'll just move forward till it's out of the frame. Double click on it, rotate it a bit, and we'll just keep it onto the foot. And now you'll see we'll also have to change our mask type from add to subtract. So that way anywhere the mask is, it subtracts the text. And then we'll just go in here and we'll clean up some of this. Let's move it into place where it's necessary. And you could take as much time or as little time on this as you want. Like I said, the feather really does take a lot of the trouble out of this. And well, that looks pretty good. So we'll hit F to bring up our mask feather options, and we'll put the feather up to about 50. And if we just scrub through that, you can see that we don't have as hard of an edge, and it integrates a lot better on the reveal. It doesn't even look that out of place at this point, which is really good. So now if we just go ahead and give this a RAM preview. Pretty good. You'll notice that sometimes the tracking doesn't work too well, especially if your camera's moving in and out of Z-space, as that changes the entire perspective of the scene. So if you do a lot of 2D tracking, you'll want to keep your image or your camera locked to a tripod and do more panning and tilting. As for going handheld, sometimes 3D camera tracking might be more in your favor. But for now, this looks pretty adequate. You'll see that sometimes the tracking data seems to get a little bumpy. And that could just be a result of the fact that we chose 2 points that weren't where we're putting the text. So you got to think about these things when you're filming. If you know where your text is going to be, try and choose points and create points if you have to at those locations, and that'll really just keep your track more solid and keep your what you're adding to your scene looking a lot more locked down. So, but for now, this is done, this portion. And then we'll move on to our next one, which is, we'll follow about the same procedure, with the only difference being that we have a little bit less to track with him coming through the scene. So we'll assume our text is still going to be going here. We'll go as far forward in time as we can without exposing it, so that we get as much tracking distance as we can. The greater the distance between your tracking points, the more stable the rotation and scale data would be. Just as it doesn't have as far to, or it has a lot more tolerance in what it can accept. So with our footage selected, we will go ahead and hit Tracker, Track Motion, Rotation and Scale, and we'll just go ahead and we'll choose some, some higher contrast points. Where this light part is on the fence, I really like. And I like this dark dot over here, so we'll just go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. And we'll just go ahead and track forward. Alright, so let's just scrub through that. And that seemed to stay on those, pretty well. So I think we're going to use that. So we'll go ahead and add a new null object. We'll call this one track fence. And we'll edit our target for the tracking data to that null object. And then we will hit apply, X and Y, yep. And then we'll go ahead and trim our null object to those keyframes. And if we just scrub through here, you can see it sticks to that fence pretty well. So now we will go ahead and add our text. Make it black so it stands out against the fence. And we'll just rotate it. You can, a very quick way to do rotation is to, in 1 degree increments, is to use the plus and minus keys on your number pad. And, that should suffice for our needs. So we'll have that there. And we'll go ahead and link it to our tracker. And we'll also trim the length of our text by going Alt left square bracket at the point we want it to start. And yeah, if we just scrub through here, you see it follows the fence quite well. So we'll just quickly do our masking at this point. So at the first frame, we'll just go ahead and draw a rough shape of Corwin's hood. And we'll hit M to bring up our mask options, hit the stopwatch, and change the mask type to subtract. And then we'll just go forward till he's out of the frame. And we'll move it over there. And we'll just go through here and fix it up as necessary, which I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of. Like this, he had pretty constant velocity the whole time in that short segment. So the keyframe interpolation is pretty good at resolving that. And so we'll hit F now to bring up our feather options, and we'll go 50 again. And so if we just go through here, you can see, where he's blurry, it half exposes the letter, which is what we want. And the edges of the letters are a little sharp, so we'll add a fast blur to them as well. And we could probably get away with 1 pixel on these. Yeah, we'll do 1.5. Okay. And so that looks pretty good. So let's just give this whole thing a RAM preview quick. Not bad. So one last thing we will do quickly before we finish up. Or rather, we'll do 2 more things. One will be a quick tip, and one will be for this specific scene. When the camera is moving, you'll see that sometimes the footage, especially right there, we get motion blur on the footage. Now our text currently doesn't have that, and that could break the illusion. But luckily, After Effects has a built-in motion blur feature, which when enabled, when an object or layer is moving, it will blur out to a predefined set of settings that you can change in the user preferences. But to enable motion blur on those layers, you'll first need to activate motion blur for the composition by toggling this button here. And then you'll want to enable it with this motion blur icon on both of the text layers. So yeah, you'll see when we enabled it on this text layer, it blurs out where it is moving with the footage, and it looks a lot more natural. So let's quickly run preview that again, and maybe you can see the difference. So yeah, it's very subtle, but it'll if it's not there, it would probably stick out a lot more than if it wasn't. So that's always important to remember. But one last thing I'll quickly show you is if you're having trouble getting tracking points, you can always pre-compose your layer that you need tracked. And then if we go into that layer, we can go ahead and add a curves adjustment. And then if you just increase the contrast, just so you get something that's really punchy and just so you get enough, like higher contrast for those minor details. If you go back to your footage, you'll see that that's updated with that. And if we wanted to track that now, we could track with this higher contrast, and it would be a lot more, you'd get points that stick a lot better. So if we just quickly retry that actually. So I'll put a point there, and I'll put a point there. And yes, I know I'm not at the beginning. But we'll just go ahead and track this forward, and you'll see, well, you will want to be picky about those smaller details, as when the shot moves and you get motion blur, you'll lose them. But if you pick out some of the higher contrast and larger details, you'll see that they stick a lot better. So, this is probably a failed attempt here quickly, but just to show you a quick tip, if you're having an absolute rough time getting tracking data and points to stick, you could always just go in, increase your contrast, get your tracking data, and then go back into your pre-comp and just delete the curves, and you'll come back and you'll have the exact same footage, just with nicer to use tracking data. So I hope that helped, and I hope this gave you some ideas as to what you could do with it. You could even use this to track a particle system to someone's finger and have them emit, like a spell or something. Just it's up to your imagination. But yeah, you could even put posters and pictures on the wall in post if you wanted to, just so long as you had a setup that would allow you to put a picture on the wall. Like, you need the tracking data for it, obviously. But with that, I think we are done. So for Tech Tyro, this is Keith Morgan, signing off.